Welcome to the National Parents Union. I am Dr. Anjali Lafarie, and this is the nightly restorative check-in. You guys, I almost didn't feel ready for a second. So I feel like I just stumbled in here. That's obviously what my energy is doing today. So happy Friday. It's August 28th. Time, you guys, time. It's really interesting to do a weekly show because then you every time I sit here, I have to say the date and I can just feel time, right? Marching along. But anyway, I am here in Arizona in this beautiful Sonoran desert on O'odham land. And like I said, this is the nightly restorative check-in. This is the brainchild of Marisol Queveda Rerucha, my comadre, somebody that I love with all of my heart. So the way that I understand her conceiving of, the nightly restorative check-in is that, and I guess also a little bit of how I think of a nightly restorative check-in is that it's that end of day, right? It's that, checking in, seeing how you're doing, right? For parents, for caregivers, for those of us who are just helpers and healers to other people, right? For me, Fridays are all about kind of cuddling up and being with the person that you love, watching some TV, maybe ordering a pizza, right? Just relaxing and being able to kind of get that quality connection with the people that you care about, in whatever relationship that is. So I originally was a guest on Marisol's show when the nightly restorative check-in started. And it's amazing. I realized too that we have different people that come in and get connected with the National Parents Union. And so for some of you, this is totally new information. For others, it's not. But NPU has been doing these shows now since about March, right? And what we thought was going to be just like, a mini, something we do for a month or two has now transformed into months of shows and months of segments and months of guests, with really no end in sight because this pandemic is still going on. So anyway, all that to kind of tell the story, right, of how NPU started, how these shows started, and again, why I was brought on. So Marisol brought me on her show because I'm a psychologist, I'm a hypnotherapist, and I'm a professor. And on, I think the first show, I've done a few with her now. I think the first show I introduced a breathing pattern called 478. And I want to maintain the integrity of her show. You all are really used to that. And I like doing that, having us arrive that way anyway. So we're going to do that breath pattern. What it is you inhale for 4 seconds, hold your breath for 7 seconds, and then release your breath for 8 seconds. And we complete that cycle 4 times through. I really want to encourage you all to, sometimes the 8 count can be a little bit challenging to, you have this, you want to dump all your breath out, right, in a couple of seconds. Do your best to try to hold your breath and extend it for that 8 count as long as you possibly can. This breath pattern is good for so many things. One of the most recommendable reasons for using it. Did I just make up a word, you guys? The most recommended, the most used reason, right, for using it is to get back to sleep. But to be honest, this is a breath pattern that I use when I'm on my way to transitioning to one event to the next, right? Just need to get centered and grounded. Okay. As always, I encourage you all to close your eyes or find a focal point. I also encourage you all to kind of take an open posture, right? And uncross your bodies. So I told you I need to get settled for a second before I take you all through this. And actually I'm about to yawn. I'm tired, you guys. But the yawn is actually good because it demonstrates that I'm getting into a relaxed place. When we yawn, we're in our parasympathetic system or that relaxation place. All right, cool. I'm actually calming myself down to be able to lead you all. All right, so go ahead and kind of get in the position that you are going to be in. Close your eyes. Just start to take your natural breath. And here, when you're ready, go ahead and inhale for 4, 3, 2, 1. hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, inhale, 4, 3, 2, 1, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, inhale, 4, 3, 2, 1, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, inhale, 4, 3, 2, 1, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Last inhale, 3, 2, 1, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. All right, go ahead and return back to your breath pattern, your normal breath pattern. Very good, and just get kind of back into this kind of time and space here. Let me properly introduce myself. So as you all know, right, I am Anjali Laferry. I'm originally from Southern California. My father is of Afro-Cuban, Afro-Caribbean descent, right? And so we are Taino and Arawak on that side. On my mom's side, she is from Maya territory, which is in Guatemala. You all have met my siblings. You've met my brother and my sister. And you will probably meet some other family members, right, in time. I'm also a mom. I'm a widow. That's another really important identity to me as well. And my community identity is that I am a part of the Siwa Patli Collective. So the Siwa Patli Collective is an organization that focuses on Indigenous mothering and Indigenous women's issues. That means that we kind of address issues of, for women and families from womb to tomb. And you actually have met some of my comadres, that's what we call one another, right? You've met some of my comadres here on the show. Let's see, I'm getting some information here that our guest may have dropped off, so let me just check that right away. Okay, so Jada, just let me know when she comes back in. I can definitely talk about some stuff until she gets back in. And actually, let me make sure that everything's set up. Okay, so, but let me introduce her, because regardless of whenever she comes in, like, it's still her. So she's not gonna change, right? Okay, so Jaysha is somebody that I met actually through the collective. Her name is Jaysha Lyons Echo Hawk. I love her name, and it's this beautiful like combination of words and thoughts, and so it'd be actually really interesting to kind of know her name story. But anyway, Jaysha is a lifelong justice seeker. Hey, are you in? Are you actually? Yeah, go ahead. Good. Let me say hi to you. I know that you dropped off, so that's why I was like, if I'm seeing you, it means you're here.
Yeah, I was in the back.
Good. I think I was getting information that we had lost your connection, so that's why I was
Oh no, I'm here. Let me make sure. Yeah, we're all good.
Nice. Okay. Well, so interestingly, we actually had a conversation about how we were to introduce you. And I actually feel like we're getting some information about how we are to introduce you. I think you should introduce yourself. So if you don't mind, go ahead and introduce yourself as you wish. And then whatever you leave out, I'll kind of fill in.
Okay, yeah, sure. No akitaru tatasati tatachik stariku, Jaysha Lions ekohak jahajakkados, Samano mushkogi chawagi, skiri pari, Omaha, Iowa. Hello everyone, my name is Jaysha Lions ekohak. I am Seminole Creek, Pawnee, Omaha, and Iowa, and I introduced myself in both Pawnee and Seminole. Ti tatachik stariku is my Pawnee name, and I'm Deer Clan through my mom, through my Seminole Creek line. I'm also a Skeety band of the Pawnee tribe, and I'm based here in Indian Territory, also known as Oklahoma. Mother of four, I'm a two-spirit birth worker, student midwife, and just all around, I don't know, active community member. I do a lot. Riku is my Pawnee name.
Sorry, I'm getting feedback from my laptop. So yeah, I would say you're just an all-around amazing person. That's like the qualifier of what I was thinking, you know? And you are, you're so, you know what you're saying. I appreciate like just your openness of coming onto the show. And yeah, I thought of you for all of the achievements, right, that you mentioned. But initially, my thought on bringing you onto the show is because you are one of the founders for Native Breastfeeding Week. And so let me kind of provide some context really quickly that we're actually in National Breastfeeding Month, right? So this is actually, this week specifically is Black Breastfeeding Week. Well, I'll bring in, you know, someone else that represents, right, that community another day. They're actually really busy. I pulled on some of my kind of friends and family, but they're having a bunch of events, right? And then 2 weeks ago was Native Breastfeeding Week, right? So the same thing, I kind of had you in the back of my mind of, I want to bring you on. So I just want to kind of be transparent about that's initially, right, what I thought of, the way in which I thought of you. But you heard me say that this is the nightly restorative check-in, right? So how are you? How are you? Homegirl, how are you? Comadre, how are you? How are you? How are you?
I'm actually feeling like pretty chill. I was in the back doing the breathing techniques as well, and listening to you count, taking in serenity is salinity, right? Drinking some water. But yeah, this has been a really interesting week externally. And interesting is really not an accurate capture. It can be very, very hard, very tough, in seeing what's been happening for the last week, just in all the ways in terms of violence in our communities. And just navigating that in my family. We are glued to the news. I have somebody who likes to watch actively, and just keeping that conversation as, I guess, kid appropriate as possible. We have two older ones. We have them kind of in sets. We have two older ones that are 14 and 12, and then we have two younger ones that are 5 and 3. So the 5 and 3-year-old are somewhat oblivious, but they're very aware of who George Floyd is, and all the people that we've prayed for in our home. And then the older two are having to kind of process like these continued situations, right? Continuous, and it's really devastating. So then we've got the start of school upon us, and we're doing virtual learning. So I'm really thankful for being able to just have all my children under one roof, because we're a blended family, and being able to like have each other's space, like we're able to hold each other as we need to, and yeah, just reminding them to remember to breathe and take moments when they can, like feel all the feelings, right? So I've been working on that myself, because I do a lot. So sometimes we can shoulder that, like we just carry that weight, and we ourselves don't actually like check in like internally, like what am I feeling right now? And what am I like, why am I feeling that sensation? And is that sensation tied to something like specific of the current time or of the past time. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for asking.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you for like, you just made my job easy. Like, you have a psychology degree.
Ah.
But wait, I want to make sure that I grabbed the ages of your children. So I heard, just because it's important, 5 and 3, and then 11 and
14, 12,
oh,
5
14.
and 3.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to, like, that detail got lost, and like the babies are important, you know.
Yeah.
There's so many things, wonderful things that you said there, and so actually I want to start with acknowledging that, yeah, you and I talked even before you came on of that, like, it's almost, I feel a little remiss because in some ways, like, because of what I teach and who I am, I feel really connected to current events. And so, I'm sure you're referring, right, to the situation with Jacob Blake, right? And the situation is the right word, because I think we don't know, like, what the outcome is. We just know. So Jacob Blake is the individual, the man who was shot 7 times in the back as he was kind of going to break up a disturbance. And I think there's so much, I imagine, tied to that for us as parents, because then also that situation was in front of his children.
Right.
So like anyone, hopefully, whoever you are, you can connect to loving and caring for people and not wanting that trauma to be relived, right? Not wanting that trauma to be created, right? In the eyes of especially children. And then just the national and the global backdrop, right, of what we're seeing, right? Again, and we could like, you are studying law right now, so you're actually studying indigenous law, right, in Oklahoma. So I imagine that the lens through which you are watching, aside from being an ally and an involved citizen, is also quite different, So how does your law background have you watching everything that's going on right now?
I will say I'm very fresh in my studies. This is my first semester into grad school. I'm pursuing a Master of Legal Studies in Indigenous Peoples Law, really to learn the law as it's written in order to fortify our tribal nations and defend and protect. I think naturally within who I am, as a two-spirit person, I like have that nurturing, but I also have this like devout fierceness to protect my communities. And so just looking through and examining, honestly, I don't know if it's law that is like what I'm reflecting on right now. I'm actually like I'm a survivor of domestic violence, and so I see a lot of those traits of abusers, like just in the larger scheme of the world. And I don't know if this is too deep or if this is very trigger, warning, like we should have a content warning. But just speaking my truth here and just understanding the way, or trying to make some kind of understanding of the way people have been processing from the various perspectives. You've got really racist perspectives, right? I heard the sheriff of, I don't know if it's called Kenosha County, but that oversees the county that Kenosha is in up there in Wisconsin, and hearing how he spoke of community that is easily mine, right? Like, I am a brown person, and I've heard the same thing said of my native community, of the stereotypes, of the racist or bigoted biases, and just hearing how punitive that is, but also hearing how like people really believe in that perspective, like they have that lens. And I wonder, like, what kind of world did you grow up in where it's so like this or that? Like, we talk about cancel culture now, and I'm like, that's the original cancel culture. You're right away just dismissing people, and assuming that locking them up or placing them under arrest or trying to find them for some kind of crime is the thing that's going to set them straight. And I know, like, as I'm just 2 generations removed from a boarding school survivor, and knowing how seeing that effects and the consequences and the work that I've had to do coming out of that through something that like the descendants, we never asked for that. The people who lived through that, we never asked for it. And so just navigating like all this from this, like, I guess, historical lens, and then like my survivor lens, and then just knowing really, I mean, law is not static, and a lot of people don't know that. And just that critical analysis is something that I hope like someday all of our relatives can have. But I know when you're in the struggle, when you're in survival mode, all you're doing is, down grinding. And so it's it's difficult, and just like trying to just capture it and understand like how do we communicate with people like that, right? Like, I don't know. And so again, like I don't know if that's the legal frame
Yeah.
that I navigating this, but I feel like it's very familiar.
Well, I appreciate your transparency, your vulnerability. Of course, the way that you are so eloquently weaving together these really big issues among various communities, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I told you this, I know we'll get it, but I know you're a former political candidate, and so I remember seeing some of the things that you were posting, and I was really uplifted, like, and encouraged
Oh.
by the intersections that you saw between like the experience right within Black America, and but anyway, within African Americans, right, and Black Americans, and really using your voice and your platform, right, to connect that, and to also make connections, right, to Native issues, right, issues of Indigenous folks. And yeah, so I admire that. I shouldn't be surprised who you are, but it is something when somebody can articulate and put all that together, especially in the way that you do, and in the many layers, because you're putting it together as a mom, you're putting it together as a student, you're putting it together. I know you didn't say this, but you're putting it together as a doula,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah, so thank you for that. So you brought up a lot of things in there. There's two things that I want to define or make sure we unpack
Mm-hmm.
for audience. And you also are putting it together from your survivor lens. And so thank you for surviving and coming out on the other side of that. You mentioned boarding school. So let's quickly just describe that not describe it, but explain kind of what the context is. I don't want people to misunderstand that. We're not talking about like Switzerland.
Right. Yeah, so boarding school is like a misnomer, or it's almost, what do you say, alternative fact, if you will. Like it was not school. They were the foundations of what, what the kid prison camps are today. Even the conversion institutions in terms of the LGBTQ community, except that there were cemeteries. And these kids who were there were as young as 3. My grandma was 5 when she was forced, and it was a genocidal policy of the US government to basically kidnap Native children, remove them from their homes in this process of assimilation into what has been the ideal for of this US standard of living it. And so it introduced the binary, it introduced gender roles, it introduced a way of life that was not ours. A lot in terms of just the feminine matriarchs. We were the property owners in a lot of our tribes. We were the leaders, or we would choose, those male figures to be the cavalry, if you will. And so, yes, there was also authority in the schools, in these schools, I should say, that were not caring. Like, they weren't teachers. They weren't teaching them, ABCs, arithmetic, anything like that. Like, that probably to some extent was taught, but it was more like conform. We don't see you as human, so we're not going to love you or show you a nurturing environment, regardless of how young you are. And these kids were kept in these schools and these institutions, rather, for years, to come back to a place and people, a language they don't know, disillusioned. Also, you don't know what it's like to have healthy coping mechanisms. you don't know what it's like to truly be a human being with the like all the feels, you know, you're not allowed to, and then it's almost like a foreignness that you're coming into back into as well. So it did a lot of traumatic damage to those immediate folks, and then that trauma is carried over in the descendants of Native people, similar to the historical trauma of Black folks, who are descendants of those who were slaves, were enslaved.
Yeah, and so again, you know, just if I could like put a bow on what you do so well is that you are able to see the systems of oppression in which are the same systems, and you're really clearly tying together the system and how it was used in one community, right, and versus the other, and your ultimate point, right, of that there's similarity, right, the separation of families, right, the stripping of culture, the stripping of language, all the things that root people and who they are. So that's actually why I describe, you know, that's why I introduce myself the way I do, right? I'm no one without my family. That's why you, right, speak in your traditional languages, right, and introduce yourself based off of where you come from, because it's that reclaiming of, if that's taken away, probably the best thing that we could do is like know ourselves, you know, and connect to whatever original parts of ourselves that we possibly can. And the other thing too, and what you said is, along with the binary of gender, which we'll go into two-spirit here in a second, the binary of gender, when we talk about blood quantum, like the way that we talk about like somebody's Black, if they have one drop of Blackness in them, the blood quantum also works the other way, right, in complicated ways within Indigenous communities, of this parsing of like, how Indigenous are you if you're 1/16 or 1/32 or 1/4, right, Indigenous. So it's all the same system.
Right.
Let's that's like that's like its own like dissertation for people, but that's okay. This is just a high level conversation today, which I love. I just want to make sure we don't lose anyone, right?
Please stay here.
Yeah, no, good. They're here, but you know, in conversation. So let me say this. So in the comments, you all, if you have questions, if we're missing something, right, please write it in. Jasha is like just this wealth of knowledge. So like, I feel like I have such amazing, smart friends and people in my life. So like my brain is like yeah, we're gonna have all these connections of conversations, right? And I'm not trying to make light of it. It is important that we understand everything that's going on, because so much is coming at us. You brought up, you know, so you refer to yourself as two-spirit, and you're also a two-spirit doula. So same thing, like define that as for the way that you identify that, and also the work that you do.
For sure. So I will say, like, right up front, that I don't speak for everybody. I don't speak for all the tribes that I come from. I certainly don't speak for all the nations here within, you know, what is called the United States and beyond. I only speak from my experiences. So the way that I identify as a two-spirit person isn't necessarily based on my sexuality, but more based on my role. So I'm Jasha. I'm Jane Marsha's kid. And I think that perfectly encompasses who I am in terms of my two-spirit identity. To speak in English, or like, you know, these colonized terms, I guess it's not like I know I can't accurately describe what it is, other than to just break it down by these words that I like, that we all know. So people can think of it as like the masculine and the feminine, and just this combination of energy. And in terms of the roles, or the community roles, that many of our tribes recognize and honored in people like us, I won't, not every tribe is able to continue their practices because of colonization, because of such policies such as the boarding school era, forced land removal, all of that, the introduction of dichotomy in terms of gender roles, like you clearly look like a woman, or you have a vagina, so you must do this. You have a penis, or you clearly look like a male, so you must do this. It's disrupted a lot of our spiritual, our community roles. And so some of those tribes, some of our tribes aren't currently practicing or honoring our people in the ways that they could. some of us do have homophobia or transphobia, bigotry, misogyny. You know, it's no different in a tribal community, in a Native nation, as it is, you know, in the outside world. White supremacy certainly has a grip on all of us, but it doesn't mean that we're, you know, struggling, right? We're not deficits. Two-spirit people are just as much of a strength to the vibrancy of Native communities. And so for me, coming into this reaffirmation, because I've always been affirmed this way, this is how I was born. It took me a long time though to process that and recognize that. And once it clicked. I actually did in ceremony with some of the comadres out there in Phoenix. It was really beautiful. It was really clear. It was the clear understanding that, you know, it almost chokes me up thinking about it, because like, again, you know, when you finally can see yourself, then for me, I feel like I was able to tie into all this ancestral calling that's been here and present all my life. Like, it makes sense. That's why this happened and these things are this way and why I see things, you know, anyway. So what I'm trying to say is I feel called back to this community role of birth work, or yeah, just birth work at large. I'm a doula, I'm a trained doula. I can do birth support, prenatal support, birthing support or labor support, and then postpartum support. I will also hold space for those who choose not to go through with a birth completely if they're pregnant and they wish to no longer be pregnant, to hold space for those folks. I will say that I'm not exactly versed in our traditional medicines regarding all of these processes, because all of these are their own ceremonies, and that's something that I'm like on this personal journey that I've been exploring for the last year or so. And I just jumped into midwifery. I say jumped into because it's something that like my own midwife was really trying to like pull me into, and just with this year, COVID-19, just impacting all of our communities, right? And knowing that the maternal health statistics, or those of us that are Black and brown, still have substandard, if that's even the right way to capture, but medical care in terms of when we are pregnant and when we deliver, and then postpartum, we still die in these, or are harmed in these like higher numbers than our white counterparts. And so I'm not traveling anywhere. I'm not doing all the things that I was doing before. I actually have time to really sit and be able to attend more births, more in person, even though, you know, the fear of COVID-19 is very real. I'm still got to do something, you know, like if this is what creators are telling me to do, then this is the way that I'm rolling. So yeah, so that's kind of when, again, like something that I was trained to do. And then in terms of recognizing how I fit in my tribal community and this role and this practice, I was like, right, I'm two-spirit. And that's the English way to say it. It's a very pan-tribal term. I still don't know that language yet for what we call our people. There's a term for it that I've heard, but I also have heard that might not be correct either. It could be like one of those, what do you call them? Anthropologist captures from like way back when. Yeah. So.
Okay. Well, the original appropriated term, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Okay, so gosh, so much there. So one, I just really want to like honor like your truth and your voice and the path that, you know, the path that it took for you to arrive at, like, just so humbly being able to kind of like accept who you are, right? And I really honor the way that you're describing your process, because it speaks to the fluidity of gender, right? And so I want to talk about that for a second, right? I mean, some of you know, right, I teach gender psychology, so like this is important to me, right? The way that we think of gender as being like all masculine, like you were saying, Jaysha, or all feminine, or two boxes that like never touch and are totally separate, is just as much of a made up construct, right? as our racial categories are, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we see differences. Somebody has darker skin, lighter skin, somebody anatomically has certain body parts, but gender is the meaning we attach to that, right? And gender is that internal lens of this is who and what I feel that I am. So you're just really beautifully describing that. And so we operate in a world that has these really rigid boxes, and then there's us, right? Everyone else that's like, hey, it wasn't always like that. It wasn't always described that way. It wasn't described that way in your lineage, right? In your tribe. And so we have this like clunky way of trying to make ourselves fit in the existing language, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that process is not easy to come by. So I'm great. I'm grateful. I'm happy for you, you know,
Thank
that
you.
you've been able to kind of come to a place of figuring that and have it guide your work. Um, Okay, so there's so many like so dude, Jason, I'm like that's just I keep saying this like you're um you're stimulating my mind, right? And there's just so many connections that my mind wants to like wrap itself around every piece, and I'm getting overexcited. Okay, so let's then go into yeah your work, and you are one of the founders of Native Breastfeeding Week. Um, and what I love about the way that you describe and refer to native breastfeeding is you also say breastfeeding and chest feeding. And of course,
Mm-hmm.
others are doing it. But
Mm-hmm.
explain that. Explain how that came to be and why the emphasis on the different types of feeding.
Right on. Yeah, I am essentially the creator of Native Breastfeeding Week as it's known on social media. Certainly not the work, right? Like Native lactation providers and supporters have been around for generations. And in terms of like the professionals, those with clinical hours, lactation consultants, IBCLCs, like all these technical terms, these nurses, these health professionals, like I'm not somebody with clinical hours. I am just somebody who wanted visibility in terms of this healing work. And that's something that finally also clicked for me just this year, and especially in seeing how much community responded to our week, our second annual week. We started in 2019 and 2020 was our second year. It really affirmed to me that like I don't necessarily like titles, like I would never really like say I'm a healer, but I can also say though that those of us that can provide milk, or the milk that is provided to our babies, like that is healing, that is medicine work. So by that definition, perhaps you are a healer. I have been feeding my babies for, oh my gosh, I think I said it was 90 months because my 5-year-old was 4.5 when he finally stopped. And then the 3-year-old is still here and there. I wish it were more. I missed her being here all the time, but yeah, she still comes for some nip sips, if you will. And in terms of calling, like, so our week is called Native Breastfeeding Week, but it is a gender term, and we are, as our committee this year has really solidified our formation. We're definitely looking forward as we move to be more mindful and inclusive, just not just in, I mean, we've been in action, but also in the language itself as well. And chest feeding is essentially for our non-binary nursing relatives. The act of lactation or providing indigenous milk to your babies, or just anyone really, milk to your babies is, well, it's particularly for us, is an, as you know, defiant act against colonization of those supposed norms, and a celebration of our culture and body sovereignty. So it's important to, yeah, decolonize breastfeeding as we know it. That's why for me to feed my child till they were 4.5 when they wanted to stop was important, because in that decolonizing act of feeding, of parenting, it's not extended nursing or breastfeeding. Like according to these academic terms, extended breastfeeding is like past year 1.
Mm-hmm.
And for a lot of our communities, prior to this disruption, through in part to colonization, it was just the norm. It was just the standard. We just would go until they wanted to stop. And so part of taking it back, land back, we just go until they want. I like to say anytime, anywhere, on demand until we stop.
Mhm. Yeah, and so there's so many things also I want to, like, this is a good place actually for us to bring in, like the Black experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking about this, essentially the issue of food sovereignty, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
if our bodies can provide the sustenance, right, for our children, um, we are reclaiming that opportunity to feed and care for and pass along all of the love, the stories, the connection, the ancestral knowledge that gets passed through those acts, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so for slaves and for Black Americans, um, that's important because through the acts of slavery, women, Black slaves, right, women were separated from their children and then made to wet nurse, right, the children of their masters, right, of their slave owners. And so again, these separations, right, between our body, the information we have, because there's information, right, there's information in our DNA that we're passing on to our children. That
Mm-hmm.
interruption, right, it's a big deal, and that's why he makes such a big deal about breastfeeding for or chest feeding for those who choose to do it. If you can, great. And if you want to, great. And if you have a different way, but the reclamation is what I want to kind of really hit home, on why that's so important in so many cultures, and so why there's like a whole month dedicated to it, and why all of us are like so excited and we have all these events. So yeah, I mean, I just wanted to kind of make that point. I don't know if you wanted to add anything in there.
Yeah, I could add a little bit. Yeah. Um, just the power of reclamation. And like you said, there our bodies are intelligently designed.
Mm.
Like they're in some ways they're kind of fragile, but they also know what they're doing. And when we parcel out everything just as the system is designed to separate and compartmentalize, like it's a whole process in terms of not just the physical intimate bonding with the baby, but the fact that the body reads what baby needs through that connection, that like almost like if you've ever seen Avatar, which is not a movie that I'm like, yes, Avatar, but Sahelu, right? Like when the baby latches and the saliva that is transmitted through the glands there at the nipple is red, and so antibodies are passed through the child. The thing though is like you said, these horrible acts that were made to diminish and dehumanize us, so we no longer want to do these things. Like we're really it's like detestable, right? If that was your experience, that was your that was the trauma. You were just like, all this information that is supposed to be for your child is forced to be transmitted into some other being that's not yours. I mean, while that baby does deserve milk, it's not to be forced that way. And that's what we brought up too during our Native Breastfeeding Week, is we milk share. Like in our communities, we milk shared, right? That means we did feed other children, but it was our community's children. And it wasn't an act of force. It wasn't an act of violence. It was because we could and we did. And it wasn't dirty. But that's what's like, in this processing of what's okay for one community versus like what, nope, like milk sharing is in some ways through the colonizers' eyes is seen as like a dirty thing, like disgusting thing, right? But yeah, we're going to make you force you to milk our kids for us. And so yeah, that disruption has led to like a variety of barriers, to these emotional barriers, to these like financial barriers, to these barriers to our healing, to the passage of information. um, it's amazing once you like do look into the medicine aspects, to the healing aspects of you being somebody who will have descendants, or if you've given birth, carried life. What the things that you do are going to be processed like in the second generation past you. So like whatever I'm doing, eating or whatever, is going to affect my grandchildren. Like if I can't remember, I think it's teeth specifically. Like they've been like, all this is verifiable research if you need the academic like where is this valid, you know, information? Like it's there, it's legitimized in that context. However, those of us who are in practice or recognize like in these oral histories, like we just know, like, you know, we didn't need that information. But yeah, getting our communities back to call it back is also not easy. I mean, while I was able to articulate, you know, from the perspective of being the creator of Native Breastfeeding Week, I understand that we have to also talk about the situation that, you know, that caused us to not be able to nurse our children as we have always done.
And I want to make the statement of like how important it is that we're having this conversation, right? That we're having it like on a Facebook Live, and that we're trying to do like a really good job of like not excusing like of why we're having this conversation. So I'll be honest and transparent that like part of like I can see myself right now going through my own decolonization process of like I'm thinking of like, oh, do I need to like, you know, tell you all that we're talking about breastfeeding? Do I need to like define terms for y'all? Do I need to tell you all why or the importance of this? And then I'm sitting here, I'm like, no, we don't, like, because that is the part of the decolonization, right? So any discomfort that is experienced, right, either by us or that I fear potentially, right, that the audience might experience, that is the aspect of colonization, right? Any discomfort we feel, this idea that our bodies produce all of the food that our children need, right? And everything that comes along with that process. That is why it is so important to reclaim identity, right? So because it's us, right? I keep going back to that. It's within us that with that feeding process is possible. So why we want to support that, right? And other parents or, you know, providers who are feeding their kids, right? Getting back to yourself, because that process was stripped in such complicated ways in so many different communities. That led to this a lot of the problems that we have, you know, now. I could go like there's so many things that I'm thinking of connections, you know, but I don't want to stray too far. Okay, but I'm getting lost, but in a good way. I'm getting lost because I'm full, you know, of like our conversation. So two things. One, what does your work look like, right? So what does the work look like kind of within your doula work or when you're supporting kind of non-binary individuals? Let me ask you that, and then we can move from there.
So I will be honest and say that I mean, maybe I haven't exactly supported a non-binary birthing person, but I know I've been able to connect with other two-spirit relatives or non-binary folks as we're still trying to find each other. We're still, like, for a long time, I was always drawn to other two-spirit individuals from my indigenous community, but then outside of my indigenous community, I've always been drawn to queer and non-binary folks as well. And finally, like, you know, when I realized, oh, I'm like you. We're all the same, and we all have our own gifts and trades and medicine and our own communities. Everything made more sense, and in doing that, a lot of us are either growing together or coming to other parts of our work with support that like we haven't really had. And I'm thinking of one relative in particular. They're a little, if you will, they're a little bit younger than me, and they're so ancient. They're just so ancient, and they actually kind of helped me come into my own as well as a two-spirit person. And they're, I guess, in my journey and my sharing, they're coming into their birth work journey, understanding that that's their community role, and that's the space that they hold for their tribal community. And it's like, it's just amazing and beautiful. In terms of the doula work right now, though, as it is COVID-19, it's been pretty difficult navigating just the birthing space in general, because not all of our relatives are familiar with midwives or familiar with like the processes of like going all in either a home birth or a birth center. Sometimes, you know, if especially if you are like a federally recognized tribal person or tribal member, you have treaty protected healthcare, which is not the quality healthcare that you would think. It's healthcare nonetheless, but it's treaty rights are basically like what allows us to occupy the lands that are not inherently ours or ancestral to who we are as, you know, whatever. So like I'm all these tribes, right? But this, where I'm residing in Oklahoma, was not my ancestors' land. Like we were located on parts of my family. We were located in what is known as Nebraska and North Kansas, and then other parts of my family were located in what's known as like Florida and Georgia. So but as I was saying, with with again, you know, going back to these systems and what's happened, we have a lot of relatives who are not in the best care or best health to go through a birthing process in that natural way, or they've never even thought of like home or somewhere away from home, or they couldn't afford to do these type of births, because even though hospital births are so much more expensive, if you've got treaty protected healthcare, then that takes care of it. Whereas, and you wouldn't have a bill. Whereas if you are operating outside of that treaty designed healthcare, they won't pay for it,
Yeah.
which is crazy, right? Something as somebody who's like interested in policy, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it definitely needs to be more accessible. So navigating how we can make that more accessible to our communities is definitely something that's near and dear to my heart. But yeah, I've just been doing it virtually or like over the phone. I can't go to the hospital with them. One of my clients is actually going to be seeing one of the midwives that I'm studying under. So that might potentially, yeah, end up in a home birth or a birth center birth. And then outside in my studies, training as a student midwife, I've been at the birth center, and there's been births that have been transported. And again, we don't get to go. We have to stay put because of the COVID-19 precautions by these hospitals, which a lot of the midwifery community doesn't necessarily agree with. Not that we don't believe COVID-19 is out there, but just completely isolating these birthing people in this process after you've been working with them through their whole time can add another layer of stress, which might not produce a smooth birth, if that's possible to say. So yeah, so it's just, yeah, it's a lot of complications, right? And we're just trying to find ways to hold space as best we can.
Well, and I appreciate also again the humility. Like you're stepping in, and and even though I think you and I are actually probably pretty close in age, but I'm still gonna say that we're young, right? You know, you are stepping into our youth, are stepping into all of these spaces that have always existed, but like the youth are asking us to make room, serve me, right? And not serve me, serve me on a platter, serve my community, right? Please recognize who I am, because I am doing the work of trying to reclaim all parts of myself. So you're just such a model for that, like in so many beautiful ways. I wanted to kind of emphasize as well what you were saying about COVID-19, right? So COVID-19 is impacting those, people who are giving birth, as far as having to be separated from folks right in the birthing space. And so it's actually increasing the work for some doulas and midwives, because folks are not wanting to necessarily give birth alone and go through that process, right? So in some ways it's good for birth work, right? And in other ways it's not so wonderful. We're running short on time, but I want to ask you one more question. And kind of where I said hoped we would get, how and why does support for birth work and for breast and chest feeding from other people, from males, right, from our partners, from other individuals in our community, why is that so important? Why should they pay attention? Because my fear is always that when we have this breastfeeding, chest feeding conversation, that a lot of people tune out and they're like, oh, that doesn't pertain to me. Why should it pertain to them?
We've always been caregivers, like our communities, regardless of like the gender norms, the binary right now, like that ability to be caregivers was a tactic to strip that away from us, so that when you look at caregivers now or caregiving work, it's either severely underpaid or it's very gendered, or you have a certain type of individual that's in service, right? And then those occupations that are in service, such as maybe the more masculine, they get honored. You get songs for them. People get like red carpets and all kinds of applause. I was just talking to my mom about this the other day. Like, we're different, but we're not. Like, a lot of the struggle, unfortunately, that she had to go through while I was growing up and that I can see now as an adult, I'm having to go through it. And I know in her heart she wouldn't want that for me, but I know that she's also certain that I'm going to be okay as I make my way in this world. The thing about it is when we offer supports to our birthing people, to our lactating people, you essentially are helping grow the next like Serena Williams, or the next, like Dr. Fauci, like we don't know who we're going to get. That's why it's important to honor and respect life in general, in terms of just like our own individual like skills and traits that we're offering. I mean, I don't know how else to say it, because it's just like all these folks that get their lives get cut short. It's like, what could have been? We'll never know. Like, maybe it was the person who could have prevented this viral pandemic, or future, climate change, or all these impending issues that are eventually going to come. We want to make sure that we're well fortified, right? So why not support those immediate caregivers, in terms of those who can carry life and are lactating, or those who are going through that birth process. I was talking to a midwife. I'll say this real quick. I was talking to my midwife the other day about oh my God, rites of passage. And a lot of our tribal communities, our native communities, we some of us still practice certain rites of passage. I don't think it's widely practiced though. I know, like, in a lot of my communities I come from, there are things that we don't have, like our menstruation celebrations. And so it's understanding that that we honor, these specific stages of life, or these cycles. Like they're just it's a process, it's a ceremony, and it's necessary in for certain reasons that sometimes just don't seem to make sense to us. And like, then we're on a new path, right? We're on a new journey, and it's a journey for a reason. So I mean, I don't know. I guess that's the best way that I can say it or capture it.
Well,
Yeah.
it's a big question. It's a big question, and
Mm-hmm.
so it's in some ways an unfair one. And I'll try to take a stab at it as well. Of
Yeah.
that, I think that when you support, somebody who's birthing, and you support their choices, if it includes breast or chest feeding, right, or not.
Mm-hmm.
One, like that connection, that restoration of birther and child, you're healing trauma, right? You're healing trauma because you are making it so that the initial and primary connection between birth person and child is one that's healthy. It's one that's not trauma induced. And that lays a good foundation in so many ways, genetically, spiritually, right?
Yeah.
For the child, right? You're restoring families, which that's where we started talking about the ways that historically, right, systemic oppression has ripped families apart. And you
Mm-hmm.
even mentioned, and so then when we try to go create a family again, we're so inadequate because we haven't had the practice and the ability to know how to make these connections. If you can
Mm-hmm.
allow somebody to have a good connection to the person who is their primary guardian and life giver and birth giver, you're going to restore your own family. And then third part is you're going to allow them to connect to their culture and their community, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the fact that we even think that sometimes this stuff is just between, to use binary terms, like a mom and child, and so everyone else should check out, or it's something private, or it's something dirty, like you said. No, it's
Mm-hmm.
something that builds our community, right? So if it builds
Right.
our community, all of us have a place in it. I'm going to let
Yeah.
you have the last word, if there's anything you want to add or
Oh,
say.
yeah. No, it is. It's building community. It's nation building, if you will. But it also like doesn't just heal that immediate community, right? You're healing that future generation as you're healing the past. I know a lot of tribal nations, like for me specifically, like my foundation is rooted in thinking of um, the past, the present, and the future, how the past informs the present, and how I'm really on borrowed time for the future. So I know in all the healing that I've been going through, that I've been manifesting, is healing my mom. And just the same, my children are being fostered in a way that, like, every day it becomes more and more real. One of our children opened up to my partner today and revealed some really, like I don't think ever in my life I'd have been able to say the things that they said today. And I was just like, like, want to go celebrate and say what it is, but I can't. It's their truth. So, but I'm just like to be in this place where they're just able to just freely express in ways that I couldn't. But I know that I'm in a place where I can freely express and heal, where my mother couldn't, but she's feeling that medicine as much as we think about like her mama. So yeah.
Tisha, thank you. Like, thank you. You know what I'm aware of, that like we have, through the collective, we have different points of connection with one another, but this is like the longest, most like focused conversation you and I have had. And I already knew you were awesome. I mean, like, I just knew, and I appreciate Esme, and I want to send out prayers and thoughts for her right now, but I appreciate Esme for connecting us. You were just so dynamic, so amazing. You deserve so many good things, and I'm happy that those good things are coming through the way of connecting back to yourself and your identity. So thank you so much, Jaysha. Like, I don't have enough words.
Thank you. Mado, everyone.
All right, everyone, we're over time, but thank you for joining us. We will be back next week. Have a beautiful and restful weekend. Bye, everyone.
Okay, you're out.
Cool.